What is up? Welcome into this Wednesday episode of Pushing the Pile, brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. We are from home today. I missed you guys. I didn't get to see you this morning. How do you guys do it?
Work from home. It was nice. I took the fam on a little coffee walk. My daughter got a cake pop, which I didn't get any bites of, but it's nice to not be in a hurry to get out the door. It's good to see you guys and hear you guys in here remotely, though.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like dealing with that Florida traffic early in the morning, trying to fight to get in time. I will say it is great to be home, but it is always great for us to be together, right? It's almost like a locker room filled.
Yep.
Well, when we're together talking football. So it is good to see you guys virtually, though.
I know, unfortunately, no whiteboard today.
I know.
So maybe next time we're back in the studio, but we got a jam-packed show for you guys. Nonetheless, we have Joe Douglas news getting fired. We have our deep dive segment a little bit later on, and then going to get to your mailbag questions at the end. But in the first off the ball here, the news came down yesterday. Joe Douglas, no longer the GM of the New York Jets. He was a darling just a few years ago. I mean, after that 2022 draft, when they got Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, all in the first round, then Breece Hall in the second round, everyone was gassing this guy up as maybe one of the best GMs in the NFL. But his downfall, and you have to pin it to him, was how he evaluated the quarterback position over his career with the New York Jets, whether it was Zach Wilson in 2021 or whether it was going all in on Aaron Rodgers a couple off seasons ago. Start with you, Leger. What were your first thoughts to this news coming down?
I mean, not a surprise. I mean, this has kind of been the trend this year. Woody Johnson is a lot of love for Woody Johnson. I have a really close and personal relationship with him. He did some things this year that we're not accustomed to him doing, right, in regards to relieving coaches of their duty mid-season. I don't believe he's ever relieved a coach of his duty after 5 weeks of an NFL season. He did that with Robert Saleh. So wasn't a huge surprise. I think everybody knew there was going to be a house cleaning the way the season unfolded. A little bit surprised they didn't let Joe Douglas finish out the season, but whether it was now or at the end of the season, we kind of knew this was coming down the pike. And to your point, right, Mike, as a GM, every GM is kind of attached with the quarterback, right? And if that doesn't work out, usually not long after, the GM isn't there anymore, right? Now, again, when you name some of the players you've named, I would say Joe Douglas, in regards to putting talent on the roster, has done a really good job. But the most pivotal piece of that roster is the quarterback position, right? And if you do not get that right, unfortunately, you're not going to be in your position long as a general manager. So when you talk about guys like Sauce Gardner, you talk about guys like Breece Hall, Jermaine Johnson, Garrett Wilson, these are all foundational frontline pieces for the Jets. So those were home run picks because all those were 4 consecutive picks in 1 year. And a lot of people thought that was going to be a changing of the guard for the New York Jets, right, in regards to turning over that franchise. And it looked promising, right? But if you don't have a quarterback in the NFL, you're not going to win football games, right? And I find this interesting because I've seen this conversation a few times, right? People could say what they want about Zach Wilson. But when you look at that whole draft class as a whole, I mean, nobody in the first round has essentially been a home run pick yet at quarterback, right? Trevor Lawrence got the bag, but we're still waiting for him to really realize his talent and take the Jacksonville Jaguars to the next level, right? Mac Jones is on another team. Justin Fields is on another team. Trey Lance is on another team. So it's like, whether he went Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Justin Fields, could they have still been in this predicament? Most likely, right? Because that was a draft class that everybody thought was going to be great, and it wasn't. That's why quarterback evaluation is so important coming out of college and in the NFL. And something that we're going to hit on later, roster construction is a real thing in the NFL, and it literally can lose you your job. So when you add the fact that, they struck out at the quarterback position, whether it's Zach Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, then you add on the fact that he just had bad luck when it came to offensive line, right? When you talk about taking Mekhi Becton high in the draft and him essentially missing almost 3 years of playing time, Elijah Vera Tucker, who's missed multiple games, right, and who's been really good when healthy, but that's the thing, he hasn't been healthy. Then you look at how they've tried to put Band-Aids over things when you talk about getting a guy like Dwayne Brown, who was towards the end of his career, and he didn't play many games for you, right? The injury bug with George Fant as well, right? That being an issue. Then Tyron Smith this year, when you don't have the quarterback position and then your offensive line is in flux, a lot of times you're not going to have success in the NFL. And I think that's what ultimately bit Joe Douglas. Now, again, still did draft some foundational pieces along the way. But if you don't have the O-line and the quarterback right, you're not going to last long.
God, Leger, that just hits home for me because I saw it firsthand in Chicago. I heard some phrases there. You talked about the quarterbacks being married to the general managers or the managers and their decisions at quarterback, whether it be through the draft or adding through free agency. You said foundational pieces. And you said at the very end, you talked about O-line. And it was really well done by you. And I want to point out, I've seen this before. I saw it in Chicago. We had all the foundational pieces. We had the skill players. We had the defense that was feared. But what we didn't have was the right decision at quarterback throughout the course of history. And it led to a guy like Ryan Pace, who did help build that defensive championship style roster, fail to do the proper thing at quarterback. And what you see is Ryan Pace go out the door, Justin Fields, Mitch Trubisky out the door, and they've had to reset again. It's kind of that same situation there with the Jets. Obviously, they're not going to have the same coach that's the head coach currently. You got to interim. You're not going to have the same quarterback most likely. So it's going to be wholesale changes. And to your point, question mark as to why they did this midseason. Well, you got to get a head start on this stuff because before you get a head coach, you got to get a general manager. So they're going to have their feelers out immediately, I'm sure.
I do think Douglas has been probably one of the 32 best GMs since he became GM in 2019. The talent he's added, just to put names to it, Quinnen Williams in 2019. Yep. Mekhi Becton obviously was great as a rookie, but injuries robbed him of what could have been a great career.
Comeback player of the year this year, maybe.
Very well could be. Elijah Vera Tucker, 2021. We mentioned Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald last year, Olu Fashanu. Yep. Like he put a core in place, but I do think when you just go deeper down his draft track record, or you just name out his day two picks, there have been a lot of duds, and he just failed to get those guys that can play a role on a roster. I'm just going to run through all his day two picks now. Ja'Kai Polite, Chuma Edoga, 2019, neither on the roster. Denzel Mims, Ashton Davis, Jabari Zuniga, 2020, not a lot there as well. Elijah Moore, 2021, had to trade him quickly after. Breece Hall, Jeremy Rucker, 2022. Breece Hall, great, but that was pick 36 overall. And obviously in that draft, he just hasn't been the playmaker this year that they had hoped he would be. Joe Tippmann last year, Malachi Corley this year. Those day two picks, I think, have really come back to bite him when you look at all the home runs, all the top end talent he's acquired with those top picks. But once you get farther down the board, not getting guys who can even see the football field for you is, I think, where this Jets roster really, really struggled.
I would say this, though, Mike, when you look at it, too, this is the other issue, right? When you're a general manager and you go through three different offensive coordinators, right? And you're picking draft picks based off the offensive coordinator, and then you switch coordinators, right? Denzel Mims, let's not forget, he was with Adam Gase. He was perfect for that system. Denzel Mims actually had a really good rookie year. But then when Mike LaFleur came in, he couldn't find his footing in that offensive scheme, right? And then same thing with Elijah Moore. Now, again, he was built for LaFleur's system, but they didn't see eye to eye a lot of times on what they were doing with his skill set, right? So he ends up getting traded away. Ashton Davis has actually been a pretty good draft pick for them in regards to being that third safety, a really good special teams guy. But you're right, like your day two picks have to hit. And I think the issue is when you keep changing offensive coordinators, especially when you're talking about the skill position players, like it's tough for them to get a footing in the offense when it's changing every single year. And that was the big issue too with Zach Wilson, right? It's hard for a quarterback to have success when you're changing his offensive coordinator every other year. So that was a big issue as well. So like as a general manager, like, you're supposed to tie everything together, but it's also tough when coordinators are changing year in and year out, right? When you go through three different coordinators as a GM, like now you're trying to find pieces to fit a specific scheme. That's why I say coaching is so important, man, because I get tired of coaches saying a player doesn't fit in their scheme, right? Like I think Mike Tomlin said it the best. Guys run away from coaching. Yeah, you got to run to coaching. Like what? This is the thing I loved about Rex Ryan. This is a personal story. Like Rex Ryan would not want to hear what you couldn't do. He wants to know what you can do, and he's going to set you up on a certain defensive package to really highlight your skill set. And I don't think enough coaches do that because they feel like their scheme is the word. It's the Bible. Like, no, like, what does this dude do well? Matter of fact, let me put him in positions to make plays. That way we can highlight his skill set. Don't tell me what he doesn't do well. Why would you want somebody to go out there and do something they don't do well? Now, I get it. You got to keep defenses and offenses honest, right? So you have some caveats there, here and there, but you want to highlight what a guy does well. Like, why would you want somebody to do something that they don't do well? I never understood that, and it's baffling to me. And I think there's a real disconnect when it comes to guys willing to coach and then also using a guy's specific skill set to help their offense.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Reid, dude. Andy Reid's one of the best in the world at it. When you watch pieces fit into his offense and what he wants to do, it's a great point. And Mike Tomlin, obviously the top of the class of guys who run to coaching. And I've seen it firsthand. You've seen it firsthand with guys that are a certain way, and everybody in the D-line room or the O-line room is like, man, this guy can really do that well. And we never get to see that trick come out of the bag because, to your point, some coaches don't want to pair scheme. The scheme is gospel, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And I do think, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, there's no magic scheme, right? Like there's no one scheme that's better than anything else. It's getting one players that fit into a scheme, but then also having the coaching or putting players in a position to succeed where they know what they're doing, where they can execute their role and do it quickly. That's the magic scheme, is getting everybody on the same page and able to do their job in a precise and quick and efficient manner. The cover 3 versus cover 4, or you're blitz heavy versus not blitz heavy. It's like all that is personnel based. If you can't be flexible in your scheme and you have to run this XYZ coverage or this front, it's like, man, those days have passed. That was 2005 in the NFL. We are so far beyond that if that's what you have to do, everyone has answers for a certain scheme if that's all you can do nowadays. So 100% agree with that point. All right, we're going to take a quick break. After this, going to get to our storylines and deep dives from Week 11.
It's a team almost too good to be true.
You guys ain't ready for us.
Kick your game day off right as the Tops team tackles all the biggest headlines around the league.
Who's got 2 thumbs and loves this next segment?
Sunday mornings on CBS Sports Network.
Leger, I love your topic. So we're going to start with that one. I'm curious to see where you go with this one, but I see it here in the notes and I want to hear more.
Yeah, it's kind of piggybacking off what we were kind of just talking about with Joe Douglas, right? And I thought the funny thing is I had picked this topic because of what had recently just happened with the Jets, not knowing that we were going to discuss, the firing of Joe Douglas until I looked at the rundown yesterday. So I'd already put that in the notes before doing that. And it's about roster construction in the NFL and how it's a real thing. And I know so many fans, this is not me taking a dig at fans, think that the NFL is like Madden. You can just put pieces here and there and it's going to work out. But we've seen ample examples of how that doesn't work. Let's just go back to the 2011 Dream Team, quote unquote Dream Team from the Philadelphia Eagles. Just want to run down that roster and just tell you the type of players that were on that team. Vince Young, Michael Vick, LaShawn Shady McCoy, Deshaun Jackson, Jeremy Maclin, Jason Babin, who was a dog at that time, Nnamdi Asomugha, Cullen Jenkins, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, Ronald Brown, Steve Smith, Evan Mathis. You know what that team finished? 8-8 on the year and didn't make the playoffs because roster construction is a real legit thing in the NFL. And when I say roster construction, right, everybody has to have a defined role. I liken that 2011 team to this Jets team this year, where it seemed like the Jets were just trying to pick names and put them on a roster and thought they were going to have success. Let's just break down the roster from last year to this year and why there was issues, right? Because if everybody doesn't have a defined role, then it's an issue. Let's look at the defense, right? This Jets defense has been a championship type defense since the 2022 season, 2023 season, right? But some of their frontline players that weren't on a roster this year, John Franklin Myers, right? John Franklin Myers is a guy who is one of the most underrated players in the league. He's that junkyard dog that does everything on the defensive front, right? He was the most versatile player they had where he can line up and down the line of scrimmage. Case in point, Kyle and Mike, I talked to some people that follow the Denver Broncos exclusively. And I asked him, because John Franklin Myers is my guy. I talk to him probably once or twice a week. I asked him, I said, how's JFM doing out there? They said, dudes, somebody from the Jets is getting fired for letting this guy go. No, that's literally what they told me. Somebody is getting fired because that was the impact that he made early on in camp. And they could tell that he was going to be something that was going to be special for them. When you add him to a guy like Zach Allen, who's one of the best interior pass rushers in all of football, Nick Bonito, who's really coming on the outside, you draft a guy like Jonah Ellis, and then you also have Jonathan Cooper on the outside. People wonder why this Denver Broncos defense is so good. One, because their secondary has really stepped up this year. And I'm not just talking about Surtain. Like Riley Moss, also Jaquan McMillan played really good. But also we know pass rush and coverage work together. And you need one player on that defensive line. And Kyle, you know this because you played offensive line. You need that one guy that holds everybody together. And that's what John Franklin Myers does, whether it's being aggressive at end, setting the vertical edge, or being able to kick inside on third down and do all the gritty work. I mean, this guy has 5 sacks this year already, right, in the interior. And when you look at the Jets now, they traded him because of money, because they wanted to get Hassan Reddick, because they thought Hassan Reddick would be a closer for him. Well, you know what happened? Hassan Reddick didn't even show up till like week 7 or 8, right? So now not only did you get rid of your most versatile piece on defense, now you got 2 voids because now you don't have John Franklin Myers or Hassan Reddick. Let's add that with the fact that Bryce Hall was a guy that really grew up in your program, undrafted free agent, right? Really developed there, led the Jets in sacks last year, homegrown player. And when you have homegrown players, you usually don't let them walk out the door, right? You can't let them walk out the door because it's not a good look when other teams or other free agents are coming in town and they're thinking about potentially signing with your team, but you're not signing your homegrown talent, right? They decided to let him go because they felt like he wasn't an every down starter. Now, it hasn't been great for him with the Philadelphia Eagles, but this is why scheme and coaching matters, right? Because the Jets had a defined role for him when he became, when he ended up being a top tier frontline player for the Jets, whether he was a third end that came in on third down. And then you saw towards the back end of last year, he became a viable starter on first and second down. He wasn't a liability on first and second down. Well, they let him go in free agency because, again, they expected to get Hassan Reddick, and that didn't work out. And then Jermaine Johnson was the guy that was going to kind of pick up the slack for John Franklin Myers. He was a guy that was their energy guy. He goes down with an Achilles early on in the season. And now, because you don't have a JFM there or a Bryce Huff, now what do? Right? Your energy on defensive line is gone. That's why everybody has to have a defined role on a roster, right? You can't just put all-stars on the team. Excuse me, fellas. And I liken it to this. If you have a whole bunch of name guys on the team, who's holding those name guys accountable? Right? Like guys like John Franklin Myers could hold people accountable because teammates knew what he did and put in work-wise throughout the week. They knew that every Sunday he was going to lay it on the line. But when you have a roster like we just talked about on the Dream Team with the Eagles, when you have a roster like Devontae Adams, Hassan Reddick, Aaron Rodgers, Mike Williams, Garrett Wilson, like who's going to be the guy that holds those guys accountable, right? There always needs to be a guy that maybe doesn't have the name that those guys have, but everybody on the team respects him because of the work he puts in. And he's not afraid to say, hey, you're slacking today. Pick it up. Like, we need more of you. Like, you're supposed to be one of the frontline guys for us. That's why roster construction is so important. You cannot just put names on a roster, and you can't just draft guys if they don't have a defined role on your team. Like, there needs to be a guy that has a defined role on special teams, a guy that has a defined role on offense, a defined role on defense. And if you don't have that and you just put names on a roster, you're going to continue to see what happened with the Eagles and the Jets this year.
Yeah, that's well said there, Leger. That is well said. I really enjoyed the part that you said about who is going to hold the stars accountable. If you're a star-heavy roster, and I think about some of these groups like Dallas, like the Jets, that have these huge names and seemingly no production as a team. And then when I think about the best teams I've been on, it's always been the guy that was not a Pro Bowler, that had no chance of, making the highlight reel, but was when practice ended, they were the guy that pulled an assistant coach aside and went through extra drills and did more fits on the bat. And they were getting their squats in week 15 when everybody else was doing the pitch shark. You're familiar with the pitch shark, right? The pitch shark was what the offensive lineman did when it got too late in the season. But there was always those leaders that were unsung heroes. Mike Burton in Kansas City, who was a fullback during their Super Bowl runs. Guy was an animal. He was the guy that I'm describing. And people like Travis Kelce and even Patrick Mahomes would look to him for inspiration. So I like that part about roster building. Get the right guys in the building that can set the example for everybody. Coaches, chefs in the cafeteria, strength coaches, everybody is better because of these certain guys you're talking about, John Franklin Myers included.
Well, I think it's the biggest, and why every year I say free agency is oftentimes fool's gold. Free agency is the final piece of the puzzle. It is not where you build your team, because when you have these vets coming in, and you just look at the Jets roster, and it's guys who used to be stars elsewhere. It's Aaron Rodgers, it's Devontae Adams, it's Tyron Smith when they had Mike Williams, like guys who were big names, who were the guy at another spot already. They have no ties to the Jets. They are mercenaries for, in the NFL sense. They are not guys who came up and this means something to them, that if when adversity hits, that they have the culture to lean back on of whatever the New York Jets have built there. No, the adversity hits and it's a lot of finger pointing. It's a lot of guys saying like, man, this isn't, my franchise. This isn't, I'm a Packer for life, or I'm beholden to this other team. They're still just playing for, somewhat themselves, is like it or not. Like they just haven't had the blood, sweat, and tears over the years with the Jets to have that equity in the franchise. And their best players now for the Jets, their homegrown best players, are all guys who are like 24, 25, 26. They don't have, they haven't been there a while themselves either. So it's such a new conglomeration there that it was just going to be difficult to work out. And then once you fire the head coach, once you fire the guy who probably was your culture there, it's just a house of cards. I mean, that's why it was the worst decision in the world to do that. Like, I thought that was absolutely insane at the time to make that move, because what's holding these guys together then? Where's the cohesiveness when you don't have that guy at the top? It still is so much a team game. And like you mentioned, your whole point, you could put all these names together, but football is a cohesive unit on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. That has to be what it is for it to work. You put all the Pro Bowlers you want out there. If they're not on the same page, it's not going to look good. So I do agree that their focus shifted far too quickly to, let me get this outside help to come fix this roster and make it good right now, as opposed to, man, we've been drafting all these guys so well of late. Let's just smooth out this roster via free agency and keep seeing how much we can build this up. I think they bit off too much that they could chew and went for the end goal too early. And I think you're seeing the results of what happened with that.
Okay.
Yeah. To your point, Mike. Go ahead, Kyle.
No, you got it.
Yeah, to your point, Mike, right? And I was adamant, you guys know about this. Again, a lot of love and respect for Woody. Personal relationship with him. I just thought the timing of it made no sense, right? There was more risk than reward when you talk about a team being led by its defense, right? And you fired the defensive-minded coach. Like, that's going to be more of a shock to the system than anything. And at the time he did it, they literally were about to play the Bills, and if they had won that game, fellas, they were going to be first in the division, right? So, like, the timing just made no sense. And then you elevate Ulbrich, who I love, and I hate this for him, right? Because it's not a really fair shake at him getting an opportunity to be a head coach. He's thrust into this essential mess, right, where not only does he have to keep his defense above water, but now he's in charge of this whole team after they just fired, like you said, the culture, the energy guy who was Robert Saleh, right? Like, people leaned on his energy in that building. Like, this, again, the risk reward just made no sense as to why they did it at the time that they did it, especially because leading up to that, the defense had been playing really well. Like, it played, besides that San Fran game, like, remember, Minnesota was scoring like 30-something points a game. I think they held him to like 17, right? And you fire him after that? Like, they lost because the offense didn't show up, not because the defense didn't show up.
Preach.
Aaron Rodgers throws a pick six. Like, so again, the timing just made no sense. And I said it right there and there. A lot of fans were mad at me, but they know me. They know I've been a Jet for life. I'm going to keep it real. I said the season's over. right? Because when you make a move like that, like the strength of your team, you shock them and it messes with them for the rest of the season. Not only that, you take your best coach on the staff and you don't let him just focus on defense. Now you give him added responsibility, right? And that hurts the defense. And we've seen that the last couple of weeks. Like the defense has not played up to the standard because the best coach on staff is the defensive coordinator who's now the head coach, and he can't just focus on defense right now. So, again, the timing of it didn't make any sense. And, Mike, I love another point that you made, right? When you talk about roster building and roster construction, it's not just made on paper. I made this point earlier this season, right? It's made in the offseason, right? It's made through training camp. It's made through practice. So you can throw all the names you want to on a paper, but a team is built throughout the season and the offseason. It's not built on paper. So just trading for guys and then guys getting there midway through the season like Devontae, or a guy holds out like Hassan Reddick, that hurts team building and team bonding, right? That doesn't build continuity on your team. So, again, this is why roster construction is so important. And you said it, when guys are in free agency, sometimes it is mercenary for hire, right? They're going to the highest bidder because they want to be financially stable for the rest of their lives. And that's why I made the point about John Franklin Myers and Bryce Huff, guys that grew up in the program. It means something to them, right? They've built bonds with those teammates. Like they bled for the green and white. So that's why you don't let guys like that out of your building.
And you can get mercenaries when you are a team that has, so like the Chiefs right now. Or
you're winning, but you
Patriots
want
in
more.
their
You need that extra flair.
When they have the long-term culture in the building, they have the guys like the Mahomes, Kelseys of the world who are the leaders entrenched already that can make everyone else fall in line beneath them. When it's all just brand new to everyone, there's just no bond keeping that team together, unfortunately. And we saw it with the Jets.
I mean, perfect example, the Rams, right? They were winning with Jared Goff, but they felt like they can get a little bit better at quarterback, so they got Stafford. So that culture was already in place when they went and got Odell Beckham Jr. or a Von Miller, right? Because the culture was already locked in with guys like Aaron Donald, with guys like Cooper Kupp, right? So the culture was already locked in. You can get away with that when that happens. But when you're the Jets and you haven't made it to the playoffs, you haven't had, winning ways, like it's tough to try to do all that in one offseason. Like people always compare it to Tom Brady and what the Bucs look like. You're talking about the GOAT. That is literally the GOAT doing that. And there were people that literally followed him because he is the GOAT. So yes, he was the culture. So they didn't have the culture. He became the culture. And I think that was the biggest issue. People were thinking that Aaron Rodgers would bring in the culture, but that just simply wasn't the case, right? The culture has actually gotten worse since he's become the starting quarterback of the New York Jets. So I think that you have to essentially put that into perspective when people talk about Tom Brady. Like he invented the Patriot way and that type of culture, right? So that's why they were able to have success in Tampa so fast.
It's funny because my whole career, it was every year we'd have a new OC, new O-line coach, new GM, new head coach 4 times. And it would always be me being suspect about leadership telling us that this is the right situation. This is the decision that will get us where we want to go. And until you get to see it in the flesh and be a part of it, like at the end when I got to go practice with the Kansas City Chiefs essentially for 6 months, you can see that it's not something that you can describe. You have to feel it. You have to see it. And in order to have that, you have to have roster construction. You have to build through the draft. And that'll lead me into my deep dive, Mike, I think. And that's obviously you got to make the right pick at quarterback because we're going to be talking dark horse MVP candidates, the MVP discussion. And it's not so obvious. And I think that's fun. I think it's not obvious this year. And there's 2 guys at the top of the list in Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen currently. But in my opinion, it's not very far behind them. And there's a lot of people right outside the doctor's office waiting to get in for this conversation. Okay. So obviously Josh Allen had his little Heisman MVP moment the other night, beating the Chiefs in Buffalo on 4th down, just knocking a bunch of, pinballing his way into the end zone. Lamar Jackson has been better than he's ever been. And this is a 2-time MVP. So he's got to be at the top of the board. Right. But there's been some trouble in paradise with the offense in Baltimore. And it's a group that we thought was the best in the National Football League. And we still think that they can be week in, week out. Don't get me wrong. But they've shown that they can bleed. And as Arnold said in Predator, if it bleeds, we can kill it. Okay,
for sure.
So you know who else has been killing it? Jared Goff. Okay, Jared Goff's amazing. I want to gauge your immediate reaction to me saying, "Hey, maybe Jared Goff should be number one." Patrick Mahomes.
I think you're crazy. That's my immediate reaction.
Patrick Mahomes has been on a couple lists as well this year.
Take him off this list.
I don't know why he's on the list. I don't know why he's on the list.
On the list.
I keep reading these lists, and he's on lists. I understand he's potentially the greatest quarterback to ever play. I know he's playing with one arm tied behind his back, and he's hamstrung with the roster situation there. But they've done some stuff there to help him out. I don't think he's on the list. The two guys that stick out to me, three if you include Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Kyler Murray.
For sure.
Now, Kyler Murray has, and we were having this discussion off camera earlier. He's got a 100 QBR, and I don't know what that means. He has 12 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. He's 70% on his completion percentage on the year. Obviously, he's like 8 yards a carry, 4 touchdowns on the ground. And when you take a look at their season, they lost 3 of their first 4, 2 of which were one possession losses versus the cream of the crop teams. I mean, you're talking about one possession blowing a lead against Buffalo on the road. And Detroit was a 7-point game, I believe. And this team has been on a tear ever since. Now, this was a group that we thought was a next year team, but I think that because of the extreme value of this guy, Kyler Murray, not only is this team a contender, and they're going to probably go on a run and win this NFC West, but I think Kyler Murray has played his way into this MVP conversation. And I'll stand by for reactions on all this. And then Saquon Barkley. I think that when we talked earlier, we talked about roster construction, and the Eagles have done a really good job. Obviously, they've drafted the right guys. They've got the right minds in the building as it pertains to a guy like Vic Fangio. Kellen Moore has been doing a really good job utilizing the talent on the field, but Saquon Barkley is spectacular. I know it's a quarterback's list, and we had the conversation for many weeks that Derrick Henry, why isn't he in the MVP conversation? Well, we're going to give him the Offensive Player of the Year. We're going to give Lamar Jackson the MVP. Well, what I've seen from Saquon Barkley, the value add to the Philadelphia Eagles offense, you can't tell me he's not on this list, the dark horse MVP list, and maybe even the real deal MVP list. And the other thing I got for you guys is this. Why aren't linemen on lists? Why isn't there alignment of the, I understand we have all pros. I understand we have pro bowlers. And I understand that that's all well and good, but half the league laughs at the Pro Bowl, and all pro is essentially as hard to get as a gold jacket nowadays. You know what I mean? Because some guys get it once and then they just stay there in those positions. There needs to be more awards. And I think that when you look around the league, and some of these fabulous offenses, and Mike, you can back me up as it pertains to Detroit, but the impact a guy like, I'm just going to use this as an example, Tristan Wirfs in Tampa Bay for their offense, Penei Sewell in Detroit, Lane Johnson's off button at right tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles. There is so much value in the offensive line position, and it is almost criminal that we're not even listed. Not one guy listed on any of these lists that I've been reading is an offensive lineman. It's only running backs and quarterbacks.
Well, here's the thing. I think
if Creed Humphrey
MVP
doesn't play in a game, if Creed Humphrey doesn't show up in a "This is my Week 12 game" T-shirt and play football every Sunday for the Chiefs, the team would look a lot different. If Lane Johnson's not on the
not
field
as different as if they didn't.
I'm just telling you, you have. They got to be on a list. Put them on a list.
It's the age-old argument of, and I agree that Offensive Player of the Year literally only going to
Ben Johnson's
quarterbacks, running backs,
without
wide receivers is where my gripe is. Like, it's Offensive Player of the Year, but it never has gone to an offensive lineman in the history of the award. So it's like, it's only these guys can be Offensive Player of the Year. I think we should expand our horizons for that. Back when I was working for PFF, we on numerous occasions gave Offensive Player of the Year to offensive linemen because they are at times even more valuable. But the problem is when we talk about MVP is that you have that V in the middle of it, value. And if you objectively try to quantify value of the positions on the football field, quarterback just comes out so far and away on top that's why they get paid what they do. That's why they always win the awards. It's just, if you're giving it to a running back, unfortunately, you're just incorrect. It just is not in the spirit of that value. But if you want to take that out, and I think we should, because to me, it just is a value. It's a quarterback award once you put that word in the title, but it should be a most outstanding player. Who is playing their position better than anyone else in the NFL? That to me is something that is
Joe Burrow would win
important. Because value, it's just like, we can just look at the AP first team quarterback award and just give it to them every single year. Sure.
So Joe Burrow is the most outstanding player. Lamar Jackson is the MVP.
Well, I think even that one's like debatable, but like most outstanding player, we can give it to Penei Sewell, right? Well, we could have given it to Aaron Donald for all those years. We could have given it to JJ Watt. We could have given it to these guys, Darrell Revis in 2009. Like we could have given it to other positions that a guy just had a season that we haven't seen before, right? And unfortunately, we're looking at these quarterbacks, and now Lamar can do some things and break some records this year of things we've never seen. Like
JJ Watt, for example, the year that not only did he have all those sacks, but he was scoring touchdowns.
Too.
That's incredible value, like literally tangible points.
Yes, but there's no quarterback doing a lot of things that we haven't seen before, but we just have to give it to one of them because, well, that's the spirit of the award when you put value in the middle of it, unfortunately.
As I currently look at it right now, right, I think the valuable does make a lot of sense, right? Because that's why I had Jaden Daniels in my top 5 for most of the season, right? He just fell out of it this past week after their loss to the Eagles.
Watch out for Ricky Wall, Jaden.
And now watch out for Cliff Kingsbury.
Kingsbury Wall, yeah.
You know what? When November, December hits, it gets a little tough.
That was a thing in Arizona. It really was a thing.
They've got a really nice college offense.
Texas
Isn't that what Cam
Taylor-Britt
said? They've got a really nice college offense.
But I hear what you're saying, Mike, when you talk about the value and what quarterbacks mean to teams. But if Saquon Barkley's not playing for the Eagles right now, they probably aren't on a 6-game win streak. And I honestly feel like he's the most valuable player on that team. Love Jalen Hurts. Love what he's done. Had some issues with turnovers in the beginning of the year. He's kind of rectified that. Now he did have that one interception versus Dallas the week before in the red zone that you absolutely cannot have. But anytime there's like a lull in their offense, they turn to Saquon Barkley and he gets them out of a rut. Like that to me shows the value of what Saquon Barkley has meant to this team. So, for the longest people have said, running, like you said, Kyle, running back will get maybe, offensive player of the year, right? But we can't put him at MVP because
we can't
the way the NFL has changed.
We can't do that, Leger.
But to me, Saquon's a top 3 candidate right now, right? Just perfect example. Look at that Commanders game. When they blew it out of the water, Saquon literally took over that game in the fourth quarter. Like either it was catching the football or running the football, and his explosive ability out of the backfield, again, either running it or catching it, always seems to get the Eagles back on track when they need a massive play. Right. So, to me, he is the most valuable player on that Eagles team if they are going to push the Detroit Lions for a Lombardi or just to win the NFC. It's going to be because of Saquon Barkley. And then when you look at it, I believe he's only 30 or 40 yards now behind Derrick Henry in regards to rush yards this season, which, again, I don't think anybody thought that anybody was catching Derrick Henry. But you have to add on to the fact that Saquon's a better receiver out of the backfield than Derrick Henry as well, and what he can do catching the ball in the backfield. So I honestly think he's a top 3 candidate right now for MVP. I don't even think he should be a dark horse, Kyle. If they continue to do what they're doing, they have a big game versus the Rams this week. If he goes off again, I think he's solidified as a top 3 candidate for MVP because when you talk about that V word, Mike, valuable, there's nobody right now currently on the roster for the Philadelphia Eagles, including Jalen Hurts, that's more valuable than Saquon right now.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to denigrate anything he's done. I predicted him to be Offensive Player of the Year before the season. I just thought you just compare what he always ran behind, because he didn't run through much, behind the New York Giants offensive line, and then where he was going to in Philadelphia. I was like, oh my God, I don't think people are ready for what this could look like, because when he has a head of steam to the second level, there's no one scarier in the NFL. Even I'd put him ahead of Derrick Henry in that regard, because he just is lightning in the open field. But at the quarterback position, I think it really is. It's still Lamar's. I mean, we can be recency bias all we want, but the first 10 weeks of
Lamar's
the
number
season,
one for sure. Yeah,
he was there. I think the biggest dark horse is still Joe Burrow, because if he leads them to the playoffs, he'll have to do it on some crazy stuff. And
correct.
He's capable of that because he's already done it. He's leading the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns. And if he truly leads the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns and throws, he only has 4 picks right now. So extrapolate that out, throws, say, 7 picks the entire season. He's on pace for something like over 40 touchdowns, darn near 5,000 yards. If he does that for a full NFL season and they somehow sneak back into the playoffs, there was no one else in the NFL, I don't think, that was going to, with that offensive line, with the way the defense is playing, that could have done that this season. So I do think that he still has an opportunity. It's obviously going to be a big if. They're way behind the 8 ball right now. But I think he's the closest one because Lamar really is, like, statistically, if you add in his running, because him and Jared Goff have, like, somewhat similar passing numbers, even though I think Lamar's are still better. But then Jared Goff doesn't.
Yeah, Lamar's number 2 in the NFL in pass yards.
Yeah. So it's like, so Lamar has a pretty clear lead, in my opinion, on everyone else in the MVP conversation. And I think Burrow's the only one who can do it just because his statistics could be just insane by season's end.
1967, Johnny Unitas won the MVP award despite not qualifying for the playoffs. In 1973, O.J. Simpson won the MVP award, did not qualify for the playoffs. Joe Burrow, 2024.
I don't think it's ever going to happen anymore. I think the ship is sailed. That someone wins.
You got to make the playoffs.
Not making the playoffs, but
this is my thing, right? I have a dark horse, but I want to talk about the Joe Burrow thing because I don't even know if this is the right way to say this, but should he get dinged for the offensive playmakers he has? 1, and 2, that they almost made the playoffs without him at quarterback last year.
I don't think so because for most of the year, it's just been Jamar Chase, right? Higgins has missed like half the season.
Yeah, but then Higgins just came back last week and had 150.
Yeah, when he comes back, like, it's awesome, right? But it's also, he wasn't there the week before when he went for 450 or whatever against the Ravens. So I think you not just, week 1, you saw the drop off when he didn't really have either guy, when Chase was just getting his feet wet again. You saw him struggle.
But that's what I'm saying. They lost.
Really only needed 1 to still put up monster numbers this season. So obviously, like, he has some, but it's not like he's working with a great offensive line or a great play caller either. He's kind of still doing a lot of it on his own there.
Yeah. My dark horse guy, and nobody's probably talking about him right now, and he has a big opportunity. Just had one versus Joe Burrow on Monday Night Football. It was Justin Herbert, or Sunday Night Football. I'm sorry.
He's been lights out, man. He's so good.
Yeah, so, like, he really struggled that second half, but the numbers can be deceiving, right? Quentin Johnson had 2 drops. Josh Palmer had a massive drop, right? 13 touchdowns, only 1 interception. Like, that touchdown-interception ratio is ridiculous right now. And the thing is, a lot of times when they get down near the red zone, they're handing the ball off, right? And they actually even used him a couple of times in the red zone runs, which, again, that's a facet of his game he hasn't used. And you have to think that Greg Roman has something to do with that. Because I believe he had like 50 yards rushing in the first half for Cincinnati Bengals this past week. He's a guy, when you talk about value, right? When you look at roster construction or lack thereof because of the Chargers being in cap hell this year, like, I guarantee most regular fans couldn't name their top 3 receivers right now for the Chargers. Right now, I can because I'm a nerd. I just named 2 of them, right? Quentin Johnson, Josh Palmer, and then you got Ladd McConkey, who they took in the second round, right? Will Dissly was – the funny thing is people always say he was a blocking tight end. People forget when he first started off in Seattle, he was a receiving threat. Like, they used him in the receiving game a lot. He became a blocking tight end, and that's why I think not Joe Burrow, but Justin Herbert has a lot of faith in him because he knows that Will Dissly is going to be where he needs to be at the right point in time, and that's why they've had a real connection the last couple of weeks. But nobody saw Will Dissly being a major receiving threat for the Chargers coming into this year. So when you talk about the lack of quote-unquote star power at receiver, right, Justin Herbert has done more with less than anybody in the NFL this year. And right now, they're going to be pushing the Chiefs for the AFC West. That's why I say they have a big game versus Lamar and the Ravens this week. They passed their first test because I think me and Mike talked about this last week. The next 4 weeks, we're going to learn about the Chargers just because of who they have coming up on the docket, right? If I'm not mistaken, they just beat the Bengals. They have the Ravens. I think they have the Chiefs as well, and I think they have Tampa in there as well.
They got to go to Arrowhead.
Yeah. So we'll learn a lot about them. And let's not forget, they lost on a one-score game to the Chiefs earlier this year. Really close game. And that was before they kind of turned the offense over to Herbert, where they literally were just trying to play smash mouth football. So I think Justin Herbert, if he can get through this stretch 3-1 or even 4-0, like, look out. He could be a real dark horse to win the MVP, especially if they win the AFC West.
I love that shout out because week 7 on, third most passing yards in the NFL. So the last 5 games, 1,371 passing yards, 9 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, no picks. PFF passing rate's the highest in the NFL over that span, the most big time throws over that span. And that was when kind of we saw this shift in the offense to actually letting it be a pass first offense at time and not just be this ground and pound. We actually saw it open up. And so if that's the guy we see, if that's the offense we see the rest of the season, I 100% agree. They could not only, I don't know what's going to say they're going to unseat the Chiefs in the AFC West, but they could have, they could have it be a 12-win team, be an 11-win team. And then if he has the numbers to do so, be right there in the mix for, statistically with all the rest of the quarterbacks in the NFL. So I love that call out. All right, let's get to mine. Speaking of quarterbacks, which teams need to have a quarterback in the NFL draft? Mine's going to be draft from now on out because I'm getting the itch to talk about it. This one more projecting forward as I was going to say, I think there's 2 quarterbacks in this year's class that are going to be talked about as we can get them top of the draft sort of guys. I'd be very surprised if we see more than 2 go in the first round. I don't think there are. You can't make them play like first rounders, right? There's just, you get what you're given. And this year, so there's 2. And the top 10 in this year's class, right now as it stands, the teams drafting top 10, we have the Jags, Titans, Browns, Giants, Raiders, Patriots, Jets, Panthers, Cowboys, Saints. I think fairly firmly we can take the Jaguars out of the conversation to draft a quarterback, the Patriots out of the conversation to draft a quarterback, and the Cowboys out of the conversation to draft a quarterback. So of those 7, Titans, Browns, Giants, Raiders, Jets, Panthers, Saints, which 2 are desperate, the most desperate to get into that top 2 picks to go get one of those?
All of them.
In your opinion.
All of them.
It's so true, though. That's why it's
literally
every year.
Every single one of those teams you named are desperate to get in there to get those top 2 quarterbacks.
It's not a good spot to be in the NFL.
It's not.
It is not a good spot to be when you're watching when you're a fan of a team who can't figure it out at quarterback, and then you turn on the 425 window or Sunday Night Football or Thursday Night Football, and there's a team actually moving up and down the field and completing passes and getting explosive. It's the most depressing thing in football, Mike.
I do think if I had to pick 2 from that, Las Vegas Raiders are just you can't do this. For sure. Because you've already had the kind of lull year. Everyone kind of gets that 1 year when you don't have a quarterback where maybe you can be let's sign Jameis Winston, or let's sign Gardner Minshew.
Gardner Minshew.
You get that 1 year from a fan base where you could do a sort of bridge quarterback. You don't get 2 years.
Nope.
If they went back to Gardner Minshew next year, the fan base is rioting. So
they would lose it.
The Raiders, I think they're in a super desperate spot. And then I think the next one is the Jets on that list. I think the Panthers, Saints can
100%.
definitely look their fan bases. And Panthers, if we see this Bryce Young the rest of the year, they can be like, hey, if we just put more pieces around him, not to say he's going to turn the guy, but he's not terrible. The Browns can re-sign Jameis. The Giants can
Giants are bad, though.
Vet and get a – the Giants, I think, actually are right up there, too. So I guess
because they should have been desperate last year to get one.
That is the thing with Joe Shane, to say he, signed DJ and then passed on what looks like, and now we haven't seen really Penix or McCarthy, but we've seen Nix. And so he's passed on at least one guy who looks like he's better than Daniel Jones has ever been. And that's a tough position to be in as a GM. So I do think those 3 specifically are ones where it's they pretty much have to get into that mix. And that's always a good thing if you're one of those teams at the top that doesn't need one, because I think the price tag is going to go up then. All right, we're going to take a quick break.
Who do you pair? Who do you pair with who?
Who with who? I mean, I think Shador to the Raiders, right?
Shador to the Raiders would be sick. He would look so clean in the silver and black.
I think
Cam mentally could play in New York.
Yes. Which one would you want him to? I mean, obviously, you'd probably want him on.
I'd want him with the Jets. 100%.
I think Shador would be better in New York.
You think so?
I think just talking about the city. Just talking about the
Yeah,
demands
but
of
I think the Raiders make a lot of sense for Shador.
So football wise, I understand. Also market wise, it makes sense. But if you were to hold a gun to my head and be like, pick somebody to be the quarterback for the fan base of New York, I would say Shador could probably handle it. The guy has had cameras around him his whole life. His dad is like one of the biggest superstars that the NFL's ever put out there. I mean, he's just I think he would take to it very well.
I just think Cam's mental makeup is perfect for New York.
I agree with that 100%. All right, we're going to take a break. After that, going to get to your guys' mailbag questions.
Yeah, wait a minute. Get it how you live it. 10 toes in when we standing on business.
The major prize at stake. The NWSL Championship, Saturday in primetime on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
As always, if you want your guys' mailbag question answered, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If not, just hit us up on Twitter when we ask for them. So this first one comes from Vegas Time 1, who asks, what is wrong with 49ers offense? Pithy, to the point. And I think the answer is pithy too. It's injuries. I mean,
I was about to say injuries.
You had last
Kittle
year.
wasn't on the field.
They were blessed last year. They had Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey didn't miss a game. Now they only played 16 games because they didn't play Week 18.
That's crazy.
Starters, but like they didn't miss a game. Debo only missed 2. You were healthy for a full season and then throughout the playoffs. So like that has not been the case. You obviously just Christian McCaffrey just came back. You have Debo has already missed 2 games. Kittle's already missed 2 games. Ayuk's missed 3 games and ain't coming back for you. Even Juwan Jennings has missed a couple games. And it's just been like when they've happened, they're kind of just all over the place, scattered throughout the schedule. It feels like there's never been a stretch where everyone's been intact and healthy throughout this season. And you also had all that preseason drama where Trent didn't show up. Ayuk didn't show up. Yep. We just talked about with the Jets and
guys all got shot.
Exactly. So
gracious.
There's no, it obviously hasn't looked as good. I don't think there's anything schematic to point to. It's just they had the dudes last year. They don't have the dudes this year, unfortunately. And that's just how offense goes in the NFL.
Continuity is huge. Health
100%
is such a big part of that, obviously. And, I think Debo has lost some shine to him as well. And I think he's such a big part of that offense historically. And obviously you miss a guy like Kittle. And Kittle, he affects so many facets of your offense. So I think that's a quick answer.
Yeah, they're in trouble this year because that schedule is a gauntlet down the stretch.
All right, next question comes from Bert. With Denver getting surprise contributors at all levels of the defense and the O-line and young wide receivers coming together, what would your priority be for them heading into the 2025 NFL draft? I still would love a wide receiver for them. Now, in this draft, not a great one. But like Luther Burden, I watch his tape at Missouri, and I'm like, that's what you're missing. You don't have a great yak guy. I mean, Marvin Mims is, but they don't even use him. Right. So like if you had a guy who's in your starting lineup that you can feature on that underneath stuff that Knicks loves, that little hitch route that can break a tackle and get it going. I would love that. Now, will he make it to the slated draft 19th right now? Is he going to make it that far? Probably not. And after that, it's not a really great wide receiver class. So for them, I think they're in a great position to pretty much covet whatever they want, right? Like they're ahead of schedule. This is a team when you draft a quarterback, you're thinking year 2, year 3. So you have the ability to just kind of play the board here. So I think if you don't have one of those wide receivers on the board, like I mentioned, you're just in a great spot to just say, what's the most valuable position and best player? Let's add them. If it's a defensive end, defensive lineman, that's cool too. Like stock it up on that's great. So I think they're in a really great
deep
spot.
there already.
You're not in a red flag situation. This is a green flag. The dating scene nowadays, people talk red flags, green flags. And I think this is such a green flag situation for Sean Payton and that group. They can go any direction. But I love what you said with the receiver position. Just make things more comfortable, more explosive, more successful in that offense. And you can do it through roster building, Leger. You can get your guy, a little Josh Downs type, somebody that's underneath that can break out of man coverage really easily.
All right, next question here comes from the JAG on X, asking about now that O-lines around the league are struggling to pick up blitzes and stunts, how does this change how front offices value offensive linemen? Will you see journeyman linemen become more valued over very talented projects? And if so, will that reflect in the O-line market? I mean, I think Kyle's phone has been indicative of how the O-line are getting valued right now. You're getting some phone calls, right, Kyle?
Yeah, I would say that the value of having somebody from that, I don't want to say old school. I sound like such an old head, but if you got somebody from the last CBA, you're going to pick up some stunts. I'll tell you that much, because they hammer home the details in the meetings. And I know these young guys, they're extremely talented, and I don't want to take anything away from them, but I don't know if it's the players or if it's the O-line coaches, because a lot of this stuff isn't rocket science. It's really not rocket science. So it's a combination of the quarterbacks, the offensive line coaches, and getting them together in that blitz meeting on Wednesday, figuring out answers, figuring out what are Leger and his buddies going to do to try to piss us off this week, because that they're through that wall on the defensive line side of the building, and they're doing the same thing about us. It just tells me that there's not as much of a commitment in the midweek. I mean, there's no secrets in the NFL, but
No.
I think that they're still going to go after these young studs. The scouting departments, they still want the best available youth, because youth is priceless. Yeah. But I think it's important to have a guy like we talk about in a quarterback room. You have one of these bridge/mentor type guys in your room that's ever important. And, if somebody gets banged up and they have to play, great. I mean, that's why we got you.
Yeah, to that point, that's why I believe swing tackles are getting upwards to $6, $7, $8 million to be the third tackle, because we just know there's 100% injury rate in the NFL, and that third guy is going to play most likely, right? So if you're a swing tackle on a team, and we know this, Kyle, a lot of these new formations that offensive coordinators like to roll out 6 O linemen, right? We see Dan Skipper going out all the time for the Detroit Lions.
You're going
to be part of the game plan. Correct. So swing tackles, there's value there. And I think that's why a lot of swing tackles are getting paid upward to $6, $7, $8 million.
Shit, they're throwing them the ball, Leger. They're throwing these guys the ball sometimes.
It's a fact.
Yeah, I
Put
think
them on the MVP list.
See backups getting contracts commensurate with where we thought a low-end starter was, and low-end starters getting paid even heavier. It's an arms race. You got to have, like you said, that 6th offensive lineman, because he'll play. That guy's going to play on pretty much every single team in the NFL at some point. All right, next one comes from Bobby Chumbus. Amarius Mims was getting cooked by the inside move from Tui Pelotu a lot on Sunday. How does the coach clean that up? Movement, drills, etc. That was something we highlighted actually right off the rip with Mims. Kyle, you want to take this one?
So when I first got in the league, all I thought about was I laid in bed at night and I thought about the athleticism and the explosion of these rushers. And I would close my eyes and I would try to go through my pass sets in my sleep, in my dream state. But those dreams you have, like when you get in a fight and you can't throw a punch. So your punches are slow. You know what I'm saying? You're just getting just tagged in the dream. That's offensive lineman dream, but we can't get off the ball. We can't get out of our stance. And as a young player, that's all you think about. Don't get beat around the edge. Don't get beat around the edge. Don't get beat around. And then somebody smarter than you, that's probably an O-line coach, says, what's the shortest distance between 2 points? And then you have to sit there and you close your eyes with your 2 brain cells and you think about it. And you go, oh, it's a straight line. I can't get beat inside. So at a certain point, Amarius Mims is going to figure out that losing outside is exponentially safer than losing inside. You can always run these guys by. You put your hand on the hip and you run your ass off. You don't stop running your feet. There's a lot of guys that make a living doing that at tackle. You underset. My coaching point would be this: step over pencils in your pass sets and always think underset. Always think underset. Inside out, inside out, inside out. If I was his O-line coach, you can afford to have your edge threatened and run guys by. Amarius Mims is a mountain of a man. He's extremely athletic. Run guys by. One thing we can't do at 6'7", 350 pounds is change directions very well. So if you go too far, you're going to have to come back inside. So stay early and leave late. That's my coaching.
Yeah, Andrew Whitworth was the king of that real short tight set. They're just like, I dare you to go around me. And then
you got to
he
either
just
bull
find a
rush
pass.
me or run around me.
Yeah. So with Mims, yeah, it was something that I think Andrew Thomas, his rookie year, was doing a ton of, and obviously he cleaned it up. So it's not like a
drill.
difficult fix, but it's very much something that does need to be fixed.
Go on YouTube and look up the mirror drill. Or if you have friends that are also big guys that play line, go do the mirror dodge drill. Period.
All right. Ian Ewing asks, Mike, what do you think is causing the lack of pass rush from the Packers? Same talent as last year that gave us a top 10 pass rushing win rate. Yes, they were 6th last year in pressure rates, 20th this year. Now, I think some of that scheme, they're doing a lot more. Like last year, their blitzes, to me, there's like 2 types of blitzes. Leger maybe could provide a little more insight on this than me. But some are just like add-on blitzes where you're just rushing a 5th just so you get one-on-ones across the board. You just want 5 guys so that the offense has to block 5 guys. Whereas there's other blitzes where you have defensive linemen truly taking themselves out of plays to try to free up, say, 1 guy coming around on a looper, things of that nature. They're doing so much more of that this year where it's like, hey, we want 1 guy to get a free look on the quarterback because that's all we need. 1 guy wins, we're good. Whereas last year when they were blitzing, it was a lot of, let's just try to get one-on-ones across the board so one of these guys can win. So there's that difference. And then I'll just say, I think 2 things. One, they've been a little banged up on the interior, but Kenny Clark does not look like himself this year. Like even if you're just saying a running game, he has very much struggled. And then I think Rashawn Gary, when he's playing with his hand in the dirt, he's not the same guy as he was when pretty much his entire career he's been a stand-up 2-point.
He's so dangerous out of the 2-point. He times up snaps like nobody's business. And he's got that low dip and burst off the ball. That's just like, that's a nightmare guy. That's a nightmare guy.
He needs to see it. I think he really needs to see what he's attacking as a pass rusher, whereas when he's coming out of that low with his hand in the dirt, he just hasn't been as effective. So that's my analysis of the Packers and their pressure rate.
Yeah, sometimes the philosophy change can really hurt a defensive line when you talk about guys having to switch up the way they're playing, right? I would like to see them let him at least be in the 2-point stance on the edge every once in a while because sometimes, like you said, Kyle, it's easier for guys when they're standing up to see what's going on, right, to be able to react, especially when they've been doing it their whole career. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time when there's a philosophy change, not just schematically, but what they're asking you to do out there on the field fundamental-wise. So I think that's been part of the issue with the Packers.
All right, last one here comes from Jake Liskow. What are some less than obvious signs that a team needs a culture reset? I think he's asking that as a Bengals fan where there's been very obvious signs that the team needs a culture reset. But what do you guys think?
Anytime there's a change of play caller.
Yeah.
That's very
especially midway through the season. But then again, that's not always true because it worked for the Buffalo Bills.
What is your line, Leger? They're the exception to
the rule. Not the rule. I like it.
I think you hear it.
Exceptions are not the rule.
I think it comes through in interviews, right? There's just when a team has a culture that people are believing in, there's a belief that comes through in the players and what they're saying. And it may not be, they still may be saying the exact same stuff, but the way they're saying it, I think you see that when there's like a demoralization in post-game interviews after losses. When guys after wins are still like, still preaching about how they're fighting or still talking about, next week we're focused on, as opposed to kind of wallowing. I think that's when you see it. And is like the biggest under the radar sign is just the tone that with which people speak.
Go look at the injury reports for during the week. Once you get past week 8, week 6,
based off the team's record. Based off the team's record.
Look at these injury reports and be like, I understand. I saw this guy get hurt. I saw this guy get hurt. That's real. That's very real. And then you're like, who are these 16 jokers? They don't have practice thing.
Hamstring back.
Hey, get your hamstring off the bike and let's get out here and practice. We're all getting paid to do this.
All right, that's it for today's show. Really appreciate all your guys' questions. We'll be back tomorrow previewing all of week 12. Can't believe it's week 12 already on tomorrow's
Crazy.
show. Until next time, keep pushing.
Peace.